Hi, I'm Mike Baker, and welcome to National Arts. You know, jazz is one of America's most important art forms. It actually sprang from a bouillabaisse of New Orleans cultures around the turn of the century and filled those backstreet clubs and smoke-filled rooms. It's the smoky milieu and improvisational nature of the animal that also led to the early soloists like Buddy Bolton and Jelly Roll Morton. Eventually, the dance bands followed, and jazz was off and improvising. Come with me, I'll show you some of those early soloists. Do you remember Mr. Heidi-Ho, the ultimate showman, Cab Calloway? The great American composer, Duke Ellington, Benny Goodman, Tommy Dorsey? Today, the tradition, though, is borne by some of the great revolutionaries like Herbie Hancock, Wynton Marsalis, Joshua Redman, Pat Metheny, and hundreds more. It seems to be the music's rhythmic improvisation, its verve and excitement, call and response, and wide-open dialogue that have also spawned corresponding movements in 20th century art, theater, and dance. To see just how influential jazz has become, it might do us well to hearken back to those early days in the century when the first notes of jazz were being heard.
Jazz got its start in New Orleans, and New Orleans was the best possible place for jazz to get its start. It was a bouillabaisse of cultures. There was African-American culture, there was Anglo-American culture, there was Caribbean influence, Spanish influence, Creole, a little bit of German and French influence. All of these things were contributing to the ferment and came together to form jazz. You also had, after the Civil War, a lot of the military bands left instruments behind. So you had a source of instruments, you had a culture, the French culture, that emphasized music literacy and music reading, and you had a tradition stretching back to Africa of parading. And so these are some of the elements that came together in New Orleans to create this music we call jazz.
The melding of ragtime piano music and the blues had a profound effect on the development of jazz, especially through the keyboard players. Storyville in New Orleans attracted the best of these early ragtime pianists. As time went on and as the music evolved, the pianists jazzed up the rags and eventually played original compositions. One of those early pianists and composers who claimed to have invented the jazz art form was Jelly Roll Morton.
When Jelly Roll Morton talks about having invented jazz, I think in some ways you have to almost believe him, because he certainly codified a lot of things. For when we're interested in jazz history, we talk about that kind of stuff. The first man to do this or that. He was the first with so many things, and one of them was analysis of the music itself. In the late 30s, when he did the interviews that the Jelly Roll Show is based on, he talked about jazz extensively and differentiated it from other things, ragtime, blues, all these other styles. He could play them, he could demonstrate them, and he said, but jazz is a combination of all these things.
I recorded with him in the 30s, and he just picked me up off the street. I would always speak to him. I respected him for what he was. Great man and great musician. Musicians didn't like him, and they were always arguing with him, and you know. But it took me off the street and recorded with him, and as we were recording something, he stopped. He told me, look, you can't play jazz unless you pat your foot. He was watching me. I said, all right. So he taught me how to pat my foot when I played. We do that now, but we don't make a noise. We do it with our feet in the shoes, so we'll make a noise. But he taught me, you can't play jazz without patting your foot. And he was right about that.
Another important band was the original Dixieland Jazz Band, an all-white group which made the first recordings credited to jazz in 1917. You had New Orleans Rhythm Kings, of course Johnny Dodds, Baby Dodds, Sidney Bechet, Kid Ory. Kid Ory left New Orleans, went to Los Angeles, and was the first black band to make a record. That was in the early 1920s. The dance bands took a step up to becoming more of a concert attraction in the late 30s and the early 40s. One of the first to play Carnegie Hall was Benny Goodman, Count Basie. In the early 40s, Duke Ellington made his debut at Carnegie Hall in 1943 and immediately established himself as a serious concert artist.
And even if you're not familiar specifically with the medium, I think that there was something innate in his music that reached and touched the hearts of people that weren't even familiar with it.
B. Ellington is the composer, and I feel that what he's done is highly prolific, if not classic. I think it should be recognized as such. The original statement that music is my mistress was a cop-out because he'd be in the midst of some ladies that were very charming, and he had adored all of them at some point or other, and told them how wonderful they were. So now, right in the middle of his security with these ladies, someone says, "Who's your girlfriend?" And in order to get out of it, he said, "Music is my mistress." But literally, in the latter days, we took that Wurlitzer and laid it in bed with him, and kept him with a sandwich and also tapes and a recorder, so that he lived music itself from day to day. It was like a fetish. He couldn't duck it, and it became an absolute part of him.
Duke and his cast of stars were also renowned for their performances at the much-heralded Cotton Club. When Duke left the club, the gifted Cab Calloway followed. Cab was different than any other singer who'd followed him. He had a silver trumpet of a voice, operatic range and diction, and the ability to scat second only to Armstrong. His band also had its share of star players. One of them was the incomparable Doc Cheatham.
Well, he had his own style of scat singing. In other words, he had his own style. And the people liked him so much, what he was doing. All over the United States, even in Europe, they liked him, because it was something different.
One of the premier bass players of the time, Milt Hinton, was also a mainstay in the Cab Calloway Orchestra, along with the legendary Dizzy Gillespie. It was their after-hours experimentation with harmonies and rhythmic changes that ultimately led to the bebop movement.
When we were in the Cotton Club at the 48th and Broadway, we could go up on the roof of the Cotton Club. In the summertime, we'd go up on the roof of the Cotton Club where the signs are and practice, because every night after we got off from the Cotton Club, we walked down to Minton's, the Jazz Playhouse. We walked down to Minton's and jam all the rest of the morning. So Dizzy wanted to practice our new riffs and our new chord changes, so we could waste all the guys that were down there already. So between shows at the Cotton Club, we'd got to get my bass, had to go up the 5 steps around the roof, get up on the roof, and he'd show me all these marvelous changes he knew, like a flatted fifth and ninths, and I didn't know too much about that. And Dizzy would show me these things and go in Minton's, and these young guys would be in there, beginners, neophytes, were in there jamming. They said, "What are you guys gonna play?" We said, I got rhythm, you know. They say, okay, and we come up with all these strange changes, and of course they couldn't play them. They'd have to leave, and we had to play it ourselves. It was really happy days. I learned so much from Dizzy, and our friendship was forever.
Milt and Doc also shared a close friendship with the incomparable virtuoso Louis Armstrong. Milt gigged with Louis Armstrong's All-Stars, while Doc actually subbed for Louis on many occasions.
He raised so much noise on his horn that he was invited to a jam session. That's what it was. I don't think they called it. In Chicago, at a little beat-up church. About 6 trumpet players. I knew every one of them. And they sent Louis an invitation to this jam session. These 6 trumpet players were in there playing and jamming. They were playing a tune called Shine. And Louis took his cornet out, his case, and went in there and just played 100 high C's, one right after another. And those guys couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe it. High C in those days was something. Those guys couldn't believe it. They put their horns down one by one. What is this guy's doing? And they all one by one walked out of the church. As far as they got, they still could hear them. As far as they got, until they got so far that nobody could hear. That made them respect all those trumpet players. And they were good ones. All those trumpet players were good. But that was a wonderful thing.
He was so amazing. I remember going to Japan with him in 1953, and he'd never been to Japan before. He took a whole entourage. And you ever heard him play when he had been someplace where he'd never been before? He outdid himself. And people came out of the woodworks to hear him. And I was on the stage playing with him, and he was playing so great, I caught myself standing there listening. I said, oh, I'm supposed to be playing. It's just marvelous to hear him.
Here comes Summer Young and his trombone wailing.
Even with the newfound popularity of big bands and distinctly different sounds each seemed to generate, reception abroad was much warmer for the jazz musician than here in the United States. Musicians like Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong became much heralded figures overseas.
Europe has had an allure for virtually the whole 20th century for American jazz musicians of color, and it continues to this day. It's a sad fact that in this country, at times it's been harder for musicians to make a living here than it has been abroad. It's not so much that in Europe jazz is more popular here, but there is a very dedicated, knowledgeable, hardcore audience that flocks to the music, supports it, and gives the musicians who go play there a real emotional and spiritual boost.
That's the theme of my jazz hour on the Voice of America. It's Duke
Willis Conover, the great late Voice of America jazz host, when he went to Poland, he was amazed to find he was treated as a hero by the jazz fans there. He was hoisted up on people's shoulders, and this was an indication of how important jazz music was to these people, particularly during their darker years. It provided a beacon of hope, a beacon of freedom coming from America.
A number of prominent jazz musicians bathed in the glow of this improvisational beacon from America. Virtuoso Sidney Bechet was a good example. His longevity in Europe paved the way for more contemporary jazz artists like Steve Lacy and Herbie Hancock.
The French always loved jazz from the 20s and the 30s, and well, first of all, they like art per se, and artists are welcome here in a way. And jazz musicians were considered artists and still are, and so we have a good reception here. Also the fact that Sidney Bechet was a big star here and lived here and really set up the thing for me to come later on.
The eclectic freedom Europe has provided Lacy has enabled him to take jazz in a new direction. By combining the great classics and jazz, he's doing something few others have.
One of our sort of missions has been to improve the level of jazz lyrics, to get it out of the baby, baby, baby stage and to distinguish it from pop music, really, and to put it into a more like an art song. I'm not too thrilled at what's going on in America with jazz-wise, really. To me, I left in the 60s because jazz was underground. And we stayed away for a long time. Then we started going back, and when we go back, it's better than ever for us. But for the musicians there, I find that jazz is underdog. And I find that it seems like it's got a reputation, well, it doesn't make much money, therefore it's underdog. And there's a lot of, I see a lot of rebop going on. It's like a bebop revival, academized. And people put on fancy clothes and they play old bebop tunes, and that's what makes money. And that's distressing to me. I find that really the opposite of what we're doing. We're trying to go I mean, for me, jazz is invention, it's freedom, and it's innovation, really. It's not gymnastics, it's not running through the motions, really. So I'm not too happy with a lot of the stuff that's going on there now, really. I feel better over here.
For myself, there are a lot of Americans who think that I don't play acoustic jazz anymore because they haven't seen any output from me, and they haven't seen any concerts of me playing acoustic jazz in America in a long time. But every year I play straight ahead jazz in Europe and in Japan because the audience there's much more of a built-in audience in Europe and Japan.
Even with the accolades they received overseas, most jazz musicians found it difficult to leave these shores. The denouement of the big band movement complicated things even further. One involved was a more diverse performer, one who had to be able to apply his or her craft in a variety of different ways.
Jazz music has always had a tough time making its own way monetarily in this country. And because of that, jazz musicians have had to be very versatile. They've had to, they haven't been able to rely on patronage, usually not any steady contracts from record companies, so they've had to make their own way, sometimes doing stage shows or nightclubs. Some of them had to, and still have to, double as teachers, tutors. Some of them have had to work in commercial music, in the movie business or the television soundtrack business. They've had to be very ingenious, and I think that's one.
Historians like John Hasse also trace the ingenuity of the jazz musician and the improvisational nature of the animal to corresponding movements in jazz dance, art, and theater. It probably comes as no surprise that Duke Ellington was the first to compose jazz for ballet groups. In fact, his collaboration with Alvin Ailey is thought to be the genesis of this whole movement.
I remember when Alvin was working on that for ballet theater and waiting for the music from Duke Ellington. And one day, I mean, he couldn't believe that this was happening to him. He got to a certain section and he didn't have the music yet, but Duke had described it to him. So he called him up and he said, Duke, I'm at this point in the dance, where's the music? He said, Alvin, I'm working on it as we speak. Listen. He put the phone down and he played it for him right there on the phone. And then Alvin could proceed. He was always very specific about his African-American heritage, and he loved it and used it to document all of the beauty and energy and strength that he felt was very much a part of the American fabric. wanted to bring them a kind of American way of moving and a modern way of moving. And so he took a blending of classical ballet and contemporary dance and jazz. And he even went back to, you know, those roots, the jitterbug, those old, you know, dance steps that they were doing in the 40s and early 50s. And Max had this, they'd done several collaborations. And one of those pieces, I think the duet is Song for Clifford. And it's a sax solo. And it's just, to me, so typical Alvin, how he responded to that music with the choreography.
We're very comfortable with jazz. We've dealt with it a lot. I find it absolutely the perfect marriage. It's exciting, there's elements of improvisation, it's hip, it's moving, it's new, so I hope more people catch on to it. It's a great, great art form.
I think that the American tradition of the jazz piano tradition, coming from Jimmy Yancey and Jelly Roll Morton and Waller into Earl Hines and on into the future, is really an amazing repository of musical thought. And so it's just something that seems very comfortable and at home to me.
My mentor, Donald Sadler, taught me to be historically accurate, and my grandfather taught me how to use or make the best use of the dancers. There's one way of choreographing, and I know each choreographer has their own way, which is workable for them and very viable. And but my way, I come into the rehearsal period wanting to use the best of the people that I've selected, and so in the audition process, it's very important to get the people that you feel confident can contribute to the process. It's not that I am relying on them so much, but it's like with my grandfather, he surrounded his compositions with the skeletal structure of what each individual player was good at. Exactly. And so what each individual dancer is good at. This show, Play On, is a fantasy. So my point was having to marry this tap dancing that used to happen at the Cotton Club and convey it to the people with rhythms that they could understand were not necessarily the rhythms then. And I also had to match the brilliance of Luther Henderson, who set down great arrangements for us and great orchestrations. And we had to live up to that, So I was guided by, I had my parameters, and so within that scope, I had to do, my work was cut out for me.
I grew up in a small coal mining town in Pennsylvania and never heard any jazz, nothing on the radio, even resembling jazz that I can remember. And when I went to college and turned on the college radio station, I said, well, what is this music? I had never heard anything. And the first thing I heard was from Dave Brubeck. And it was so strange. I thought, this is really strange, but I really like it. So I just wanted to hear more, and went over to the station and asked them about it, and then just started to buy jazz, and I just think it's extraordinary. There are other choreographers who choreograph to jazz, but I'm the only one in the United States that I know of that has a company focused on, classic jazz dancing. And there's a company in Canada called Decidedly Jazz. They work with blues and authentic jazz. Maybe, I don't know, maybe people are intimidated by it. I don't know. But, it's like, I suppose, the thing that set the company apart from the beginning was the fact that I wanted to present this in concert form, not just as a show, like an entertainment, which I hope ultimately that it is, but that I wanted to explore the music and present it in this sort of formal concert-like fashion. Sometimes I explore what's in the music. It may not necessarily have been what the composer intended, but it's very interesting to me sometimes when I pick a piece of music to choreograph and what I discover in it for myself. I just love that part about the process. I hope it grows and flourishes, because I am sort of alone there, and whenever, we travel and young students, young kids come to see the performances, or we get to do some classes for them, and they have such a great time in our classes, and I always say, why don't you take a piece of jazz music, put that pop music away just for once, and just try some jazz. So I'm hoping that there will be more people, more choreographers who are interested in, exploring themselves and their artistic, bent with jazz music.
Theater has also proved a beneficial venue for the jazz musician looking to expand his or her horizons. Indeed, many of the great musicians have composed, conducted, and played for a whole host of shows. Five Guys Named Mo, Jelly's Last Jam, Ain't Misbehavin', Blues in the Night, Play On, and many more have not only honored the jazz idiom, its composers and performers, but represent a whole new literature of theatrical jazz.
Being a conductor, music director, I never had it so good as they say. First class across the board. The pay is wonderful, working with a great group of people like family, great accommodations, you're not staying in a flea bag hotel, and you have people at your whim, to bring you certain items you may need, like, water. It's just a feel-good sort of position. So this show is perfect for me because I'm part of the act, and I'm playing. And we play over beyond the charts. We're improvising, and we're getting down, as they say. A good show can take you on forever. Like Phantom. I don't think Phantom will ever stop running, or not that I would want to do that, but some people don't want to do it. Just like I had some friends that worked the circus, and they said they didn't want to see another animal, or the redundancy of it. But this music is we improvise. If you notice, because we had sections where we had the freedom to solo, the solos weren't fixed, and we had a chance to do things with them,
Tomorrow is a busy day. We got things to do. We got axe to lay. We got ground to dig and worms to scratch. It takes a lot of sitting, getting chit-chat. Ain't nobody here but us chickens. Ain't nobody here at all. So quiet yourself. Stop the fuss. Ain't nobody here but us.
I tend to have nice jobs and nice surroundings as a jazz musician, but I had a lot to do with that, as well as the fact that I had to sell myself. I had to be prepared to do certain things, and doing certain things mean to respect the audience, to respect the room, to know if I wanted to make certain kinds of money that I had to have certain disciplines about me.
Another composer, conductor, and music director at home with the jazz art form is the award-winning Luther Henderson. His theatrical, operatic, and concert works are some of the most highly revered in the world.
Well, I've been very lucky like that. I really have had some wonderful opportunities, and I've just done the best I could to take advantage of them, yes. I have to say that I think that the happenstances in my life are most unusual, most fortuitous. The fact that I can you know, draw the path of my best by talking to names like, you know, from Ellington to Lena Horne to you know, on the other side, you know, Castellanos and Richard Rogers and people like this, all through my life.
With his jazz experience, which he grew up and he's part of, and then you add that to the Broadway experience, that he takes a piece of music and he presents it and he develops it and it gets a little more and more exciting and it has a climax and then it ends, and it's theatrically it's perfect, and we're very fortunate and we have a lot of respect and by this time love and admiration for Luther.
Okay, now look at that. You got some kind of a whole lot of written garbage there. All right, all this means is this something we work out with the chorus.
He says that when he wrote for you know, Duke Ellington, he couldn't write any jazz solos or anything that he had. He says, but now he can do it, you know, and so he says finally it's a chance that he can play jazz and hear it played.
Mercer and I, Duke's son, was always kind of like family, you know. And when I got out of school, out of the Juilliard in 1942, he was certainly at one of the peaks of his time. You know, as we were talking before, the 35 to those 3 or 4 years after 1935 were so everything, things just came pouring out. It was incredible. And I think that I was lucky enough to arrive on the cusp of that whole thing, and I've been ever grateful ever since.
Another composer who's had tremendous success with the jazz art form is Andrew Lloyd Webber. In fact, Andrew's fascination with jazz spawned Cats, the longest-running show in Broadway history.
Artists admire and study other artists, and I think that we allow ourselves to become influenced by them. And jazz and the music is absolutely an integral part of American culture, and Andrew was very receptive to incorporate it into his music, because that's something very American and very special about our contribution to the art form.
The mystique of many of the early jazz artists, that indefinable something that made them so musically delicious, also inspired a whole generation of visual artists like George Knock, Billy D. Williams, Frederick Brown, and jazz insiders like Milt Hinton. Once inspired, they endeavored to recreate the improvisational nature, the celebrity status, and the smoky milieu of the jazz art form.
There's no set way of doing or creating a piece of art or jazz. That is improvisation. I mean, there are no rules, no regs. You're in tune with creativity. This is a compilation of all musicians right before they're ready to play. It's that state of reverie where you're getting ready to hit something, do something, but you don't know exactly what you're getting ready to do. It's that moment before you put the sax in your mouth. Milt used to send me a Christmas card every year. I would met him on a jazz cruise, and it seems as though I had seen him in New York and other places, and we just kept bumping into each other into each other, and I just liked the way he played, and I liked his expressions, and I liked his hands, and I thought about his hands, and I said, boy, he's got some nice hands, you know, real thick, yet he's picking the finest notes and everything. And so it sort of seems like the basis for some of the pieces he played. And it really inspired me. When I do a piece now, and I want to do some more musicians, more music, whereby I can express it with the colors. Not a lot, not full color, but just to get you the essence of the impact of the instrument and how it sounds just through visuals. I met Ella Fitzgerald at an NFL Players Association meeting out in LA and talked very briefly. I met Sarah Vaughan on a cruise and we talked a little bit. But Nancy Wilson was one of my all-time favorites, and I did a show out in LA, and she came through and she saw one of the pieces, The Diva. And it happened that The Diva was really inspired by all of these women.
When I grew up, we grew up on jazz. I mean, it was all around, everywhere, and particularly bebop. I mean, that to me was like an original moment in American musical history. And so I embraced it, and I decided I really wanted to try and talk about those, to try to get inside of it from my perspective as a painter. To me, it's like an original moment in American musical history. I mean, out of swing came this moment when all these young kids came along and they decided they wanted to express themselves in very individual ways, or individualistic ways. And they found all these venues. And of course, in those years, you had the venues for jazz. Jazz was very much a part of the moment. Today, it's a little different. I mean, the ones who are interested in jazz have to really seek out moments, and they have to kind of create the moments now. But it was already there in those years. And so these people had some place to go. I mean, you had up in Harlem, where I came from, on 117th Street, you had Minton's, which I have a painting of, as a matter of fact, where a lot of the originators of bebop used to gather. People like Dizzy Gillespie, people like Charlie Parker, people like Charlie Christian, and others who were the forerunners of that whole movement. And I remember going up there as a kid. I was just a kid, you know, they were a lot older than me, but I was just a kid, and I used to go up there, and it was a great experience for me, because it was, I always regard it as improvisational music. It's a music that lends itself to a lot of things. I mean, a lot of things can enter it. I guess a lot of people look at it and they think it's, for the most part, it's an emotional kind of expression. But there was an awful lot of thought that went into what these guys did. I mean, it's not as simplistic as a lot of people would like to think it is.
Somebody gave me a camera for my birthday many years ago, and it was synonymous with traveling. I could stick it in my pocket and we'd travel, doing those one-night stands, some things bad, some things good. And I wanted to record it, take pictures of it, about musicians only. That's all I was involved in, was music. So I wanted to take pictures of musicians the way we see each other, not the way photographers see us. They see us with our instruments. I wanted to see us sit at the table eating, sleep on the bus, listening to a playback. If you want to hear you see a musician very intent, photograph him standing, listening to something he just recorded and trying to judge himself to see how he can do it better. He's in a complete other world, and this is a different approach. I wasn't thinking that perhaps nobody had seen us like that too much. And so I was very lucky when my dear friend, Dr. David Berger, came to me to study with me, and He took an interest in my photos, and it became books, baseline, and overtime.
And I got a chance to get some pictures that photographers couldn't get because when we were recording, they wouldn't let photographers get in the studio. When I'm in there already with my camera, and the minute the conductor takes a break, I whip out my camera and I get a shot that some photographer wouldn't have a chance to get. And then the musician wouldn't pose for me. It was just natural because I'm just one of the guys. If you were a big enough star and been in a band, you would wear a hat. Most of us didn't. It was you were big enough reputation. He had Cozy Cole, which was a big man that played with Benny Goodman, and Denny Barker, big guitars, and Chet Carter's a great trumpet player. And he and they sing to one another here, "You're the greatest." He says, "No, you're the greatest." He says, "No, you're the greatest." I was lucky with my work.
Just as important as the diversity of the jazz artist in preserving jazz's legacy is the tutelage of established artists. In fact, I'll bet you didn't know that nearly all the great ones have proven excellent mentors.
Traditionally, the jazz community has been that, a community. It's been a fraternity, and there's been a lot of camaraderie. There's been healthy competition, but there's also been a lot of looking out for the next person. It was the big band leader, Woody Herman, I believe, who said, when you get to the top floor, send the elevator down for the next person. You know, there's a great deal of cooperative spirit in the music, and this has taken many forms. Sometimes it's taking a younger player under your wings and giving that person lessons or encouragement.
Thelonious Monk was one of the earliest examples of the fraternal musician. In fact, he always had an open-door policy when it came to young musicians. Today, artists like Herbie Hancock are continually involved with lectures and electronic classrooms, and in the case of Wynton Marsalis, record producing.
The way that happened, George Butler, who was the head of A&R, Artists and Repertoire at what was in Columbia Records, now Sony Records, called me and said they were getting ready to sign this young 19-year-old trumpet player. I think it was 19 then. They had talked, and they were talking about me possibly producing it. And I told them I said, look, let me hear what the guy sounds like. So they sent me a tape, and it floored me. On one side, he's playing a duet with his father. It was Wynton Marsalis and Ellis Marsalis playing piano. The other side was Wynton Marsalis playing a double trumpet concerto with the New Orleans Symphony Orchestra, and his trumpet teacher playing the other trumpet. And that was incredible. And so I just listened to the talent that was coming out of this young kid, you know. I told them at Columbia Records that, yes, I will be very happy to.
Wynton Marsalis and Pat Metheny have both benefited from the Jazz Artist Helping Hand. Their ongoing charge, therefore, has been both to perform and educate.
Jazz music was created to let us know how to communicate with each other. And we need that now as much as ever because we are forced to relate to each other, and we don't like it. But that's why jazz music was born.
Things take time. Now the question is, how much time? So in our lives, we're always trying to push that card a little further. And, you know, it's just a matter of work and of diligence and just constantly, because I think people always want the best if they know about it. If you know it to be the best, that's what you want. And when you realize that the best doesn't have to be the most expensive, then you naturally will gravitate toward it. And that's what jazz music is. It teaches us how to conduct a democratic dialogue. And that's what we need out here more than anything now.
Now, if somebody was singing that, like let's imagine Michael Jackson's going to sing Autumn Leaves. He's not going to go, you know, he's going to put some Michael Jackson in it, you know. And so you gotta find a way to like really say the melody, but kind of in your own way. Now, I mean, in my case, I would tend to play something like yours, but I would kind of, you know, I'm always happy to participate in these kinds of opportunities to, you know, spread the word a little bit. It is a little bit difficult in our culture and in this country right now to learn about jazz, which is a little odd for me and other members of the jazz community who travel all over the world and are constantly referred to as being, you know, great ambassadors for the United States, you know, great contribution to the art forms, which is jazz. And weirdly, most people in America know very little about it. So situations like this are important, and I'm happy to be here to participate. Jazz is something that I think is one of those things that the attention and interest that you bring to it as a listener will equal the rewards that you get back from it. I know that a lot of people only listen to jazz in a very casual way, or they have, you know, a little bit of contact with it, and they have oftentimes, oh, I don't know if I like that, it's too complicated, or it's too this or that. The thing is that there's so much variety under the heading of jazz. I mean, there's so many different kinds of players and different kinds of ensembles and groups of musicians. There's definitely something there for everybody. It's just a matter of taking the time to learn about it and you know, discovering what you like, but it's always worth it in the end.
Helping the young musician and educating the public at large about jazz go hand in hand. One of the more unique examples of jazz education is provided by noted scholar John Eaton. He has toured hundreds of college campuses through the auspices of the Smithsonian's Resident Associates Program, performing and enlightening audiences on the jazz tradition.
Sophisticated lady, obviously, ladies and gentlemen. One of the most beautiful and beloved and familiar of all American popular songs. I might add that it has always held fascination for musicians. You probably just think it's a popular song. But, you know, in those last few sort of odd-sounding notes that I played, innocent-sounding too, is packed a lot of genius. The genius of its composer, Duke Ellington.
Even with the resurgence of jazz in recent years, the musician still suffers from a lack of musical notoriety. He or she must diversify in order to flourish. Funding of music education is in danger of being cut at a time when more should be spent to educate our young about this underappreciated music tradition.
Education is key to the arts, and it's a big struggle today because left and right, local school systems, pressed financially, have been cutting back on arts. Some schools see it as a frill. Of course, the arts are not a frill, and study after study have shown that getting students involved in music, for instance, helps them develop verbal skills, mathematical skills, self-discipline, cooperation, other things that are really essential to them. In the last 30 years, jazz has become institutionalized in schools and colleges and universities throughout the United States. You now have jazz majors available at many music departments, and you have something like 1/3 students, mostly high school students, playing in jazz bands. What the Smithsonian is trying to do is publish the great classics of this music so that these students and their teachers can get a hold of the real thing, the masterworks. In the 21st century, the people who pioneered this music, who pioneered New Orleans jazz, swing, bebop, modern jazz will no longer be with us in the flesh. We will have, thankfully, their recordings. We will have, in some cases, their memories. We will have their influence on successive musicians. We will have, in some cases, films and videos. And we will have the sure knowledge that these giants created a brand new, highly original, completely American body of music that has meant so much to so many people in this country and around the world through the decades, and I think will be with us not only into the 21st century, but into the 25th and the 30th and the 35th and beyond. Truly, when future millennia look back on the 20th century, I believe that they will count American jazz music as one of the great shining products of this century.
Now at home, as well as abroad, they call him Mr. Jelly Lord, and they mean that. They call him Mr. Jelly Lord.
That's jazz. It's music, composition, art, theater, and dance. Our mission, therefore, should be to encourage and to nourish this creative and spontaneous burst of energy, the body of which, in so many ways, defines us as a nation. Until next time, remember, jazz was meant to be appreciated, so you be a part of it. Production of this program has been made possible in part by a grant from Philip Morris Companies Incorporated and their family of companies.